this morning. Oh, you're slick. You investors in hate. You're so
Coming to you live from the studios of KMUD, this is Heroes and Patriots. Heroes and Patriots is a program about national security, intelligence, and foreign policy. Today is Thursday, June 6, 2024. And as I said, we're coming to you live from the studios. And if you're also joining us on the web, that's kmud.org. We thank you for joining us. I'm Mary Massey, and with me is my terrific co-host, John SAKOWICZ. Good morning, John.
Good morning, Mary, and good morning to our listeners listening to the broadcast live here in Northern California, and to our listeners listening throughout the country on the web stream. I want to thank everyone who contributed to my Facebook page for the Doctors Without Borders. We raised several $100s last year. We raised about $700 for Wounded Warriors. This year was Doctors Without Borders. Next year, it will be KMUD. So I know our membership director is listening, and she will make that happen.
And I realize that the station is looking for an extra little bit of change in this period. If you are so inclined and able, we would ask that you become a member of KMUD. It's very, very important to continue programs like this and all of the programs and music that you hear on this station. Heroes and Patriots is archived here at KMUD on our program Facebook page and YouTube, and our own website, heroespatriots.org. Our thanks to Dorothy for stepping in today to be our engineer. As always, we invite you to call in with questions on topic for our guests. That number, 707-923-3911, and please be on topic.
Mary, before you introduce our first guest, I want to say that our next guest will not be in the usual wheelhouse of national security, intelligence, and foreign policy. It will be in the wheelhouse of what we consider to be local heroes. So I just wanted to say that, and I want to say also that local independent media, be it the Anderson Valley Advertiser or Red-Headed Black Belt or Mendo Fever, these are all very heroic ventures by very heroic people to bring independent, fact-checked media with professional standards and ethics. And I really admire them, which is why we have our first guest today, who you're about to introduce.
That is correct. Many of you who live in and around Mendocino County are certainly familiar with the Anderson Valley Advertiser. Today, John and I are pleased that Mark Scaramella is our first guest this morning, and the publisher, Bruce Anderson, is recovering from surgery, but we do want to acknowledge him for all of his hard work, and we certainly wish him well in his recovery. And at the end of last month, May 2024, after many years, almost 70, the AVA discontinued its print edition, and now it's only available online. Our show, as John mentioned, is a big fan of independent media, which also plays into some of our other topics. And we welcome you to call into the show to say hi to Mark Scaramella and thank the AVA for the many years of fact-checked reporting and fearless investigations, all delivered in an idiosyncratic, hard-hitting style. We here at KMUD are firm believers in the independent media like the AVA, which is a cornerstone of informed public and participatory democracy. So having said that, we'd like to bring in our first guest via telephone, Mark Scaramella, who is calling in from the Anderson Valley. Mark, are you with us?
I am. Are you with me?
We are. You know, I always, when I look at the paper, I see you're on your masthead. You've got America's last newspaper, and the other quote is, fanning the flames of discontent. I think that kind of says it all about your history. Would you like to comment on your headings there?
Well, the fanning the flames quote comes from the old Wobblies slogan from the IWW in the early 20th century, and the last newspaper is, I guess, kind of ironic at this point.
Yeah, I think of the New York Times masthead, all the news that's fit to print. And you certainly have had some controversial reporting and articles and so forth throughout the 70 years. When did you join ABA? I know that Bruce began it in the 50s. When did you become a part of it?
Bruce bought the paper in January of '84. Before that, it was the relatively famous Homer Mannix, who was the fire chief, the judge, the editor of the newspaper, and all around de facto mayor of Boonville. So he bought the paper, curiously enough, from an Indian man in Covelo named Gino Jameson, who learned the printing trade in the Indian school in Southern California and came back up with his equipment in the early 50s and started the paper. But he wasn't much of a writer, so he didn't have a lot of content to provide. And after a few months, he sold the paper to Homer Mannix, who operated it into the 70s. It went through a couple of short ownerships between the late 70s and '84 when Bruce bought the paper. I started with the paper in June of 1990.
I see. And you are a contributing writer.
I'm the managing editor at this point, yes.
Excuse me. But you also do contribute with articles. What do you think is the most, let's see, what's the best way to put it? Difficult article or story or so forth that you were involved in, and what kind of feedback did you get?
I would the paper's biggest story. There would be a number of them actually, and most of them are archived on our website, theava.com.
Okay.
The Judy Berry bombing case was, when I first got here, that was the big active story. And that one certainly got a lot of feedback. Bruce has written a lot about it. I've written a little about it. We followed it, from day one, from before the bombing, actually, and then all the way into today. And the loss of the key piece of evidence, the letter, the Lord's Avenger letter, and the DNA that might have been on it that would have allowed it to be pursued. But the FBI never even investigated that case. And I could go on, but anyone interested in the case could go further or ask about it.
Right. John?
Yeah. My own relationship with the ABA probably goes back 25 years when I first moved to Mendocino County. And, I've been kicked to the curb to them a fair number of times, but I got over it because, I'm a public person. I ran for office. I was a county employee. I was a trustee of the retirement system and had a couple of other appointments in the county. And, you just, after a while, you just have to accept the fact that independent media has its place. And that place is to do good investigative reporting, independent investigative reporting, muckraking, if you will, and let the chips fall where they may. With all due respect to the Ukiah Daily Journal here in Mendocino County or the Times Standard in Humboldt County, it's their resources are very, very thin. I think the Ukiah Daily Journal only has one staff reporter, Justine Fredrickson. She does a great job, but she's only one reporter. They're good at reporting Little League scores and Memorial Day parades and this kind of thing, but they don't do the kind of reporting that Mark does, that the Anderson Valley does, that Red-Headed Black Belt does. Mark, comment on just really what you bring to the table.
On content.
Yeah, on content, and what you bring to the table.
You mean me personally or the paper, or I'm not sure of the question?
Yeah, the paper.
Well, a skeptical attitude towards government and large corporations, I would say, the main thing that is necessary: a skeptical attitude and an interest in the details.
And why doesn't, say, the Times Standard in Humboldt County or the Ukiah Daily Journal, why don't they have that interest in government? We know here in Mendocino County, we now have a structural deficit. We have a treasurer auditor who was summarily dismissed. We have a lot of, the mismanagement of Measure B funds that was supposed to have built a psychiatric unit. Why doesn't mainstream media seem to care?
I don't think the public actually cares that much. I'm sorry to say. I'm disappointed in that aspect of it, and that was part of, I suppose you could say, part of the reason that we stopped the print edition. That the readership was, as we like to say, mostly on the rightmost column of the actuarial tables, and as time went on, it just became more and more difficult. We certainly got some complaints from our older readership about not having a piece of paper in their hands anymore. But people don't read much anymore. It's a hard sell to get people to read a detailed article that is about subjects that are arcane and provincial and require attention on the part of the reader and an ongoing interest in the subject matter. So it's not just the papers themselves. It's a combination of the papers and a sort of a deterioration of interest in public affairs.
Do you see other newspapers going to an online-only format, meaning that print will eventually disappear, since we all seem to gather our news from online, cable television, etc.? Do you think that's the way how it's going to go?
Well, my personal opinion is yes, but I'm certainly no media pundit or anything like that. That's a bigger subject than I pay attention to. But it sure looks that way, that everybody has a phone, and the schools are having difficulty even getting kids to get off their phone and pay attention to the teacher.
Right. Go ahead, John.
Yeah. So where is the ABA now? How many online subscribers do you have? What is your break-even point? Are you still viable? How does the math break out?
I'm not privy to the economics or the numbers really. I know we have a lot of online subscribers, and I think anybody that pays attention to Mendo matters, Mendo concerns, certainly lines up. But I'm not even privy to the online numbers or the economics. One of the interesting things that I didn't realize until we got our website, the interesting thing about the website is that every new subscriber is gravy. We don't do any more work. With a print edition, every time we got a new subscriber, we had to actually physically buy, get a print edition printed and the mail and the postal paperwork. All that was an extra cost. Whereas with a website, when you get a new subscriber, there's no additional cost. We're still doing the same thing. And those economics, that was an interesting sort of obvious when you think about it, that dynamic. So these big communications companies, every new subscriber they get is gravy. It's the model is completely different. It doesn't cost them anymore for another person to sign up.
And how does one become a subscriber?
Log on to our website. It's right there. There's a PayPal option and of course checks or money orders or whatever. It's $25 a year for a lot of material. Some might say it's too much. We put a huge load of material up every day.
You sure do. You have a feature called Mendocino County Today, which is just almost all-encompassing for county business. And a lot of times, going into Humboldt County and Lake County as well, since the Tri-County area really has very similar issues. Talk to me about your readers. Who are your readers?
That's an interesting. I think it's quite a variety of readers. I don't think you can characterize them very easily. It's pretty much the bulk of them would be people interested in county affairs.
Right, and you actually cover what happens in our Mendocino County Board of Supervisors meetings, which and oftentimes are dramatic. Do you want to say anything about that particular subject? Go for it.
I prefer you be a little bit more specific. What was it? What was it's a painful process. I can assure you, it's not. It's something that is a guilty pleasure, I guess you could say. Sort of a difficult to keep up with it. Yeah. We've seen a general deterioration in the quality of public officials in the last few years, and I'm afraid that it's certainly reflected with our board of supervisors. There are some pretty good people, in these advisory boards, the Redwood Valley MAC and all of the advisory boards around the town and the school districts and the special districts. They certainly have there's a different dynamic because most of those people are volunteers and they're not paid. They don't see it as any kind of a career. Right. So there's the people are doing it out of genuine public interest, and they're harder and harder to find, of course. But I don't have a lot of problem with them. The problem is with these overpaid people who don't really have the qualifications to be in the position that they're in.
Mark, overpaid is, you nailed it. I think our county chief executive officer makes a total compensation package of about $350,000. The city manager in Ukiah, city of only 18,000 people, gets the same compensation package, about $350,000. What's up with what seems to be a ruling oligarchy in county and city and county government, where you have these vastly overpaid, public workers, and the poverty statistics here in Northern California are pretty shocking. Dan Hamburg, our former congressman and supervisor, once told me that a third of all of our county residents were eligible for food stamps.
It's a half. It's not a third. It's a half.
Wow.
How do you justify those pay packages in the context of so much and widespread poverty?
Well, number one, I would disagree somewhat with you used the phrase a little too broadly. That I don't think the line workers are particularly terribly overpaid. Mm-hmm. I think they make more than the average non-government employee, but they're not. I don't think they're particularly overpaid. That's these days with understaffed offices across the board and so forth. I think I'm not complaining about that kind of pay. What we're talking about is the top officials, and it's a tail chasing exercise because their salaries are based upon what the guy next door is getting. They're not based upon any real value. I mean, as Bruce used to say, we've got more competent managers running the Ukiah Safeway.
Right. 707-923-3911 if you'd like to comment or ask a question of our guest today, Mark Scaramella from the Anderson Valley Advertiser. John, you look like you had another question there.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Mark, what he thinks about the viability of the AVA going forward, the viability of other independent media like Redheaded Black Belt and Mendo Fever. I think the Observer, Jim Shields runs the Observer out of Laytonville, I think. What's the viability of some of these independent media properties, Mark?
I don't know. I think it's pretty much a scratch operation. Nobody's making much money off of any of them.
Hey Mark,
but it depends on the dedication of the people doing it. They're small operations. It's hard to say. I think we are lucky to have what we have.
Right. We have a caller for you, Mark. Caller, if you're listening, go ahead with your question. You're on the air.
Good morning. Let's hope that there are more heroes and honorable patriots. Mr. Scaramella, good morning, and thank you very much for your strident reporting over the years. I've been now just shy of 30-year resident of Mendocino County, and having been raised in major metropolitan cities around the country, I've never seen a small location with politics so corrupt, with a law enforcement that is so inviolate of its responsibilities. Millions of dollars of payouts for sexual harassment. This is true throughout, we got Fort Bragg Police Department with sexual harassment issues, Ukiah, and Willits. So to dovetail into my question, former Sheriff Tom Allman gave us less than 2 weeks notice after 13 plus years of his service, supposed service, and he remains under indictment along with 56 Bruce Smith, David Eister, who is the continuing sitting district attorney by name only, who's also involved in the audit issue because he refuses an audit, as does Kendall, the chosen appointee of Tom Allman. I'd like to ask if you have any comments about the RICO indictments the FBI has leveled against members of Mendocino County law enforcement for their collusion and the sponsoring of the Roanoke Park officers that were sent to federal prison for their hijacking of cannabis and cannabis dollars and personal property. Thank you for your time. Folks, make a donation, send a couple bucks, go without a Snickers, send a couple bucks to KMUD today. Thank you for your support.
Thank you, caller. Mark, would you like to discuss that or talk about that?
Well, there certainly is. There's plenty of evidence that the Roanoke Park cops who were convicted, that was a serious ongoing problem that I'm glad that was reported and put a stop to. I haven't seen enough evidence to comment on the Mendo angle of that case. It's still pending in the courts. There is. I think the caller reflects a view that's not unusual, but I personally have not seen enough evidence to, it's incomplete, and we're still waiting for that case to play out. I know he's right about there were some cops, a cop in Fort Bragg that was taken off the Brady list. There was the Murray case, which was badly mishandled at the Ukiah PD. There's the what's his name, and the Willits guy was
Derek
Henry. Those are all certainly high-profile cases that are blotches on the records of all those departments, and we just have to keep an eye on it from here. I don't know what else to comment on. I like I say, I haven't seen any strong evidence that Mendo was directly involved in those Roanoke Park crimes.
Mark, I know that the Mendocino County Today feature of the AVA sometimes quotes or picks up stories from a redheaded black belt here in Humboldt County,
which broke the story on the Roanoke Park.
And that's what made me think about it. Do you want to talk a little bit in the few moments that we have left about maybe some of the collaborative work you do with other independent media?
Well, I don't know if you'd call it collaboration, but we do request permission to use local other. We certainly link to other websites and other coverage. The other coverages like Mendo Fever and some of the Facebook things, they all provide a pretty good, up to date. Our strengths are more in the more in depth coverage, but these websites that can cover disasters and accidents and breaking crime stories, those provide a very good contribution to the local media picture.
Mark, we only have a few minutes left. I want to remind listeners that the reason we're having you on the show is because the last true small newspaper in the country, the Anderson Valley Advertiser, discontinued its print edition in May. I personally am very sad. It's kind of a landmark, not just for local media, but really for the country. We see fewer and fewer small newspapers every year here in the United States. The AVA is one of my heroes. Mark Scaramella, with whom we're talking, is one of my heroes. The publisher, Bruce Anderson, also one of my heroes. I think he described himself once as a socialist with strong, nay, overwhelming anarchist instincts. And this is coming from a Marine. So he's a complicated guy. But the AVA is just smart. It's funny. It's cynical. It's hard hitting,
and it's truthful.
It's real news. So, Mark, we want to honor you and the AVA for all the great work you do. We want to honor all the other independent media out there: Red-Headed Black Belt, Mendo Fever, The Observer. You really bring accountability to city and county government. And once again, tell our listeners how they can subscribe, how they can stay involved.
Don't forget K-Mud News.
K-Mud News. Yeah. So K-Mud News, again, another source of independent media, not an NPR affiliate, not just running, NPR feeds, but doing some very hard-hitting, real news here in Humboldt County. Mark, tell us how listeners can support the AVA.
The website name is theava.com. The email address is ava@pacific.net. Our phone number is area code 707-895-3016. It's pretty straightforward, and even some of the older people who have had no longer have their print edition anymore, they've been able to figure out how to use the computer version of the paper. And if, like I like to tell some other old people, if Bruce Anderson can figure out the computer, then anybody can.
Well, we want to wish Bruce well. I know he had a serious diagnosis he was dealing with. I think he was treated at UCSF and got good care there. We wish him well. We hope he lives many years to come and continues to guide this paper with your able stewardship as well. Mark, thank you for all the real reporting that you do, all the hard-hitting reporting that you do. I wouldn't know anything about this county. I wouldn't know anything about the Emerald Triangle if not for the AVA and your sister publications like Red-Headed Black Belt. You're one of my heroes, Mark.
We think we've got, the other thing that we have that I don't think anybody else has anything close to is the archive. And the archive archive on our website is not behind the paywall. The $25 a year subscription it covers the current week. Anything that's over a week old is generally not behind the paywall, and it's an amazing archive with going back to all the big stories in the county.
Right. Yeah. And I want to say as well that your comment section on the Mendocino County Today's feature is very lively. So on any given day, you could have, 10, 20, 30 people having a back and forth, very spirited discussion about what they just read. And it's a nice little community to be part of. You publish letters to the editor, which represents a wide range of diverse opinions. You're very inclusive, and readers really can be a part of the AVA story as well. Thanks,
welcome
Mark.
the feedback, certainly.
Mark, thank you so much for being our guest. We wish you and the paper just every good thing, and we appreciate your being our first guest this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, and God bless Bruce.
Yeah.
I'll pass it along.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
It's 31 minutes past the hour, and if you're just tuning in to KMUD, this is Heroes and Patriots. And we just concluded a half hour with Mark Scaramella, who is the managing editor of the Anderson Valley Advertiser. We are going to go right into our second half, given the time. And we're going to be revisiting some issues that have been happening in the Middle East with a guest that we've had on several times. He's one of our favorites, and that is Richard Silverstein. He is it's a TIKKUN alum, which he created. He is a Seattle-based political blog that regularly reports on Israeli security matters. The blog was created in 2003 by Mr. Silverstein, and it covers the Arab-Israeli conflict. And today we are going to be, I guess more than anything, updating.
Yeah, we need an update. So first of all, Richard, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be back with you.
Yeah, it's good to have you back. You are my go-to guy. There's a lot of static out there. There's a lot of white noise out there. There's a lot of disinformation. There's a lot of propaganda from all sides. It's hard to steer. It's hard to steer clear of all the lies and half truths out there, and find our way to what's really going on in the Middle East, and in particular with the war in Gaza. Since we've last had you on the show, pretty much the main campaign in Gaza has concluded. But now we're entering a new stage. Please update our listeners as to what the real-time picture is right now.
Sure. Well, I'm not sure I would say that the major fighting has concluded. It has concluded in certain parts of Gaza, mainly in the north. But there's a huge level of fighting in Rafah, which is a bone of contention because of the massacres that Israel has done there. And there's fighting in several other areas of Gaza that continues. The death toll of Palestinians, especially civilians, increases. And that's death toll focuses mostly on women and children. So the disaster continues, unfortunately. And, the main thing I think that has changed is the global picture, the sort of response to what I am calling Israel's genocide in Gaza. You have now two or three orders from the International Criminal Court for Israel to stop the war in Gaza, which it is not doing because there's no enforcement mechanism to that ruling, but it does have some importance and standing. And even more important is the International Criminal Court, which is a separate court, that has found that Netanyahu and his defense minister have engaged in, I don't know if they use the term genocide yet, but crimes against humanity. And the chief prosecutor has said that he plans to issue arrest warrants for Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant. This is really unprecedented. There has been almost no court cases from the ICC against Western nations and against nations that consider themselves democracies, which that's again a bone of contention about whether Israel is a democracy, but we don't have to get into that now. But anyway, it is really an unprecedented matter. And we have the U.S. approach, the Biden administration's approach to the war, which has basically been to be an accessory to Israeli genocide by providing billions of dollars, that's what it be, worth of weapons to Israel. And many of those weapons are used, the JDAM bombs and missiles and guided precision missiles have been used in the war to kill Palestinians. So it's an ongoing, continuing war against Gaza, against the civilians of Gaza. Right. And it has, even though Joe Biden has proposed a ceasefire plan with a lot of fanfare, claiming that it's an Israeli plan, I don't see that happening. So the war continues, unfortunately.
Right. Well, I was watching the news this morning, and you're right. The conflict is still going on with strikes. This morning, 45 people were killed during an Israeli airstrike on a United Nations-run school in central Gaza, and the United States and 16 other countries whose citizens were taken hostage by Hamas. They are set to release a joint statement sometime today, calling on Israel and Hamas to agree upon the most recent ceasefire proposal. What do you make of that?
Well, it's very interesting because in the normal course of events in Israel, the populace supports wars without question. The support is usually 90 to 95% of Israelis support every war that they fought in the past, including wars in Gaza, Lebanon, and other places. And now you have a situation where there were about 150 hostages, about I don't know how many were released in an earlier ceasefire, and now you have probably 40 hostages at least still being held.
Right.
So the constituency of families of these hostages and supporters of these families is huge in Israel. And you have unprecedented demonstrations against the war, unheard of again in Israel. And the hostage families now go to the Knesset. They disrupt the proceedings in the Knesset plenum. They bang on the glass windows of the new visitor gallery, and they really engage in disruptive behavior to express their feelings, their demands for the end of the war. And part of the reason why they're so desperate and engage in these tactics is because the government has a deaf ear towards their concerns. The Israeli government, and Netanyahu himself basically ignores the hostage families. He met with them once, and he was condescending toward them and their concerns. So they've had to go out in the streets, and I hope that they're going to have an impact on this. And the Biden ceasefire proposal and their tactics will bring Israeli government to its senses. However, that government is really rooted in a far-right extremist element within the cabinet that doesn't want the war to end and doesn't have any interest in freeing the hostages. So this for them is a war against Palestinians and a war against not just Hamas, but all Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, a war to either exterminate the Palestinians, force them or expel them from where they live. And this is one of the really horrible aspects of the Israeli government that stops the war from ending.
Does Netanyahu and his staying in office, does that have anything to do with the lack of the ceasefire?
Absolutely. Netanyahu needs the war because he has 4 criminal indictments for corruption and bribery. And he knows that as soon as he steps down, as soon as the war ends,
right,
the attention of the people will turn to who is responsible for it. And Israelis feel, with very few exceptions, feel that Netanyahu was responsible. Of course, there were others, there were intelligence failure, military failure. But Netanyahu, as the political leader, bears a huge responsibility. So the polls all say that if he stopped the war and he went to elections, he would not be prime minister any longer, and the opposition will come to power. However, it's important to point out the opposition doesn't really represent much of a change. They might agree to a ceasefire, but their approach to the Palestinians is the same as Netanyahu. They refuse a 2-state solution, which is really the only way that you can solve this issue in the long term. Either a 1-state solution or a 2-state solution are the only ways to solve this. And Israel doesn't want to solve it because it doesn't want to recognize a state.
Hey, Richard, we have a caller on this topic. Caller, if you're listening, you're on the air. Go ahead with your question.
Yeah, remember the Reagan Iran hostage deal. Do you think there's any credibility to the Republicans arranging a deal with Netanyahu not to allow Biden to appear powerful on the world stage by accepting this peace plan and keeping the hostages and the war going until the election?
Thank you, caller. Did you get all that, Richard?
I did. Yes, the Republicans are providing an important lobbying base for the Israel lobby, for the pro-Israel elements in this country. The invitation to Netanyahu to speak to a joint session of Congress was initiated by the Speaker of the House, a very right-wing Republican, Mike Johnson. And the Republicans are really an anchor of the pro-Israel forces in this country. And yes, I think that the invitation for Netanyahu, by the way, is a war criminal, at least an accused war criminal. I would call him an outright war criminal. The invitation to speak before the joint session is another way that the Republicans can prepare for the November election by showing the Democrats to be lacking in enough support for Israel, even though, as I mentioned, Biden has sent billions in weapons to Israel. Also, the Biden administration officials that appear before the media are always backing Israel, always less diminishing the impact of all the massacres like the one you mentioned on the UNRWA school. And they're basically Israel's chief defenders in the world because Israel doesn't have many of those left. So yes, the Republicans are very important here. And they're angling for November, and they're looking to use Israel and Gaza as a cudgel against the Democrats in the upcoming election.
Richard, speak to all those college students and others who have been protesting Israel's war crimes in Gaza since October. What would you say to them right now? Americans are famous for their short attention spans. How do we keep Gaza in the news? How do we keep the war crimes in the news? How do we keep Mossad's, recent threats against ICC prosecutors and their almost probable assassination of the Iranian president in the news? How do we keep the fact that most of Hamas's fighters are not in Rafah, despite what Israel says? So how do we keep all of this before all of us who are protesting, who are outraged, who are angry, including those of us who are Jewish and who make a sharp distinction between being Jewish and being Zionist? How do we keep all of this front and center in the news, particularly as we go into a presidential election season?
Well, that's a lot.
I'll try to break it down a little bit.
The student part was the first question.
Yeah. So I wanted that was a really good issue you raised about the students. I think they have been the spearhead of the anti-war movement protesting against Gaza. They've engaged in at least 120 campuses around this country. Plus, you had campuses in the UK and in France and other places creating the encampments. You see all the tents out there and the quads of the major universities. And the backlash against the student encampments has been huge. The administrators have called in police. The police have basically rioted against many of the protesters, smashing their skulls in and thrusting them on the ground. That includes elderly faculty members who have been in solidarity with their students. And the movement has been huge, as I said, and it's really been one of the driving forces in opposition to the war. And it has been part of the overall opposition in America to both Biden's policies, which I've mentioned, and to Israel's prosecution of the war. So I don't think that this issue is going to go away by November. That is what Biden is banking on, and that is the reason for the ceasefire plan. He wants to be able to say when it fails, which I predict it will, that, yes, I did something important, I tried, and the parties in the Middle East were at fault, were failing, but I gave it the good old college try. That will not work, in my opinion, in the public. And this has been really one of the albatrosses around his neck because of so many people in America hating this war. And it's dragged down his poll ratings. And even after Trump's conviction in New York for the Stormy Daniels affair, he's still ahead. He's ahead by almost 2 percentage points in most polls. So if this won't dent Trump's popularity, then there's very little that Biden can do if he doesn't stop his engagement with the Israelis on this war. And as to what we can do, I think we have to try to force or pressure our representatives in Congress to take a stand to oppose the policy. We have some very courageous members of Congress and even some senators who have really led the charge in the Senate. Of course, Bernie Sanders is one of them, then the squad in the House, and even some other more mainstream senators and members have really engaged with this anti-war sentiment. And we should also note that there's a prediction of at least 100 members of Congress, of the 535 members of Congress, at least 100 are going to boycott. Now, that's an issue that people can really get behind. They can tell their representatives in the House and Senate not to appear at the speech. And if they do appear, let them know that you will take that into consideration when you vote in November. And this is a wedge issue that the Republicans are trying to use, as I mentioned, and we should deprive them of that by trying to get our political echelon in America to stand up against the Israel lobby and against the Republicans.
Yeah.
707-923-3911. We have about 9 more minutes left with Richard. You're done. We're asking the question.
Yeah, Richard, speaking about courageous members of Congress, let's take our own congressman here in the 1st District of California, Jared Huffman. Almost a perfect progressive, except for his views on Israel and the war in Gaza. I think he got the highest score that the Sierra Club has ever given any member of Congress ever. He is the strongest environmentalist in Congress, and on almost every issue, he comes down on the right side, except for Israel. And I've strained my relationship with him, trying to get him to budge on no more military aid for Israel, no more bombs for Israel, no more ordnance, and all he issues are these very non-committal, kind of playing both sides of the fence types of statements, decrying all the violence, decrying all the war crimes, pointing out that Hamas started the fight, but never really condemning Israel's war crimes. How do you get good members of Congress, like our own Jared Huffman, just to move off the dime and to stop being so afraid of the Israeli lobby? He's such a good guy. He is really such a good guy, except for this one issue. How do you appeal to a person of conscience like that?
Well, the Israel lobby, AIPAC, and other Jewish groups, I don't want to limit this to Jewish because the Israel lobby includes non-Jews and evangelicals and groups like that. But they make it very hard for members of Congress like Huffman to take a position, to take a principled position on the Middle East and on Israel and on Gaza. They're going to pour 100 million with an M $1 million into primaries in Democratic congressional primary elections to get pro-Israel Democrats elected. That happened in Oregon, north of where you are, where they elected in Portland a so-called progressive Democrat, but one who accepted huge amounts of money from the Israel lobby as part of that 100 million. And Hoffman probably realizes that if he took that position I'm talking about, that he would face a huge amount of opposition. He would face an opponent in a primary, and that opponent would be funded with millions of dollars. In some of these elections, AIPAC and two other pro-Israel PACs are spending $8 to $10 million in one race in a primary election. Once they have their pro-Israel candidate elected and nominated in the primary, then they don't even have to spend money in the election because the Republican, they're picking districts mostly that are Democratic. So that's why it's really hard for them. And I'm not saying that I have understanding for them. I oppose, their timidity in taking this kind of position. So we have to make them pay a price, even if they're good guys. And I respect what you're saying about him. I'm sure they are. There are lots of other quote unquote progressives in Congress who are right wing, in effect, when it comes to Israel. So we have to strengthen the PACs that are donating, that are opposed to AIPAC. There's PACs like J Street and several other PACs, and there's Occupy Democrats and Justice Democrats that are supporting the squad. We need to get squad representatives elected. And there are more and more that are winning in the primaries and also winning in the general elections. However, AIPAC is extremely successful with that $100 million. And the $100 million, by the way, comes from billionaires in California and in lots of other places. A lot of them Republican billionaires. They're giving $100 million in Democratic primaries. So, and the Democratic Party, the leadership, has not really, opposed this sort of encroachment of Republicans into their election system. So we have to really focus on the Democratic Party and excuse me, in districts like yours and in other progressive districts where they should be electing either a pro-Palestinian Democrat or at least a Democrat who's like Bernie Sanders, who is taking a position on the war, an anti-war position, and also willing to support Palestinian rights and at least a two-state solution.
You know, Richard, you hit the mark just now. The first district here in California, first congressional district, is almost a gerrymandered district. It's the narrow coastal strip from Marin County, just north of San Francisco, all the way up to the Oregon border. And I would say registered Democrats probably outnumber registered Republicans 3-1. I'm just guessing. It's really a blue district. And Congressman Huffman has had no competition in the primary, and the Republicans candidates that they put up very weak, and usually get about 40% of the vote or something like that, if that. So, as you rightly point out, the contest would be in the primary, and here in the district, we have very strong. We could have very strong challengers like Norman Solomon, who and who ran against Jared Hoffman whenever they last faced each other, which was 12 years ago, 14 years ago. Yeah. So you could have a viable challenger in the primary. So again, how would you deal with that? How would you encourage some free thinking at the primary stage? It seems almost antithetical. It seems almost anti-patriotic because, again, for this one issue, you know, but yet, you know, the war crimes continue. Mossad seems to be more dangerous than they've ever been, and maybe you want to say a word about that, how they're now threatening ICC prosecutors. Wind up the show and then tell our listeners how they can support you and your work.
Well, I think that we have to put forward, we have to encourage progressives to run. We have to try to support them financially to the extent that we can. We have to use the newspaper, either feature articles or letters to the editor to let the people know in your district your feelings about this. And we have to communicate with the members of Congress. Use social media. If you're on Facebook or you're on Twitter or any other platform, have a presence there and let your feelings be known, because I'll tell you, Israel is spending tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in fraudulent campaigns on social media, creating avatars, fake avatars to promote their message. So we have to be honest in our activism, but really put us forward as strong a movement as we can.
And a way to find you on TIKKUN OLUM, could you just briefly say that before we sign off?
Sure. My website, TIKKUN OLUM, is at richardsilverstein.com. And notice on my social media and on my website that I'll be publishing an article in the New Arab that is a run-up to the speech that Netanyahu is giving. That should be out a few days before that speech, which is going to happen later this month.
Our guest has been Richard Silverstein, the creator of the blog TIKKUN OLUM back in 2003. Please go to his site and help him out, support him, and support this bigger cause. We very much need it.
And we'll be having Richard back periodically, you know, as we move into the new phases of the war, just to get a reality check. I want to thank Richard very much. He's an old friend. For being on the show and for doing all his truth to power reporting. You know, we started out in the first half of the show talking about local independent media. Well, Richard is a representative of national independent media. And except for independent media, we would have very little media.
Right.
We would have, you know, we would have a lot of opinions like on Fox and what have you. We would have less news. We would have just editorializing. We would have hate mongering. We would have nonsense. We would have fun and games.
Projection.
We would have projections. We would have everything but real news. So thank you, my friend. Everything but real news. So thank you, my friend.